So, which is
Just hang out in the cold and snow all night long, so you can, that's not cold enough, you have to do that.
no, it's when we did a big, nice Greenwood loop route.
I don't think I've been
Firebox
Yeah.
and all that. That was a good
That's,
ride. I was pretty licked. I had wore my summer shoes.
Oh, summer.
Yeah.
How your feet are thawed out.
It
you know.
was terrible.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I felt great.
Yeah.
all right, there he is, good.
And picking and choosing and getting that stuff dialed in, but for the most part, things are kind of there. Adam's coming out, of course, till January, so I won't see him until last month.
Yeah. We'll be back in Colorado somewhere, right?
But you know Brian, don't you?
Brian who?
Broomall?
Yeah.
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 All right,
He's
well,
doing it too?
Yeah.
Okay.
may as well get started. That works for everybody.
He's pretty.
All right, call the meeting to order. Everybody's here, which is great. It's great to be back. It's the time we open the open forum. So we've got a microphone right over here. If anybody wants to come up and speak, go ahead and do so.
Okay.
Come on up. Let us know who you are and everything.
Which one?
That, we can use that one.
Okay. Hello, I'm Alyssa Hedstrom. And I operate the dental office in town. And so I'm mostly here because I just want to talk about the alternate street parking and how that works for my business. My problem is my handicap is on one side of the street, and I operate from 8 to 5, and it feels like a bigger burden to have patients moving their cars back and forth during the day from that 8 to 5 time. And I know, like, the city, like in the down, I kind of feel like I'm in the city, I'm paying the city taxes as a, business is operating, and most of the other businesses seem to have parking lots. So I kind of was just thinking about more being like a downtown business. So having some sort of, I don't care about my staff. We can follow the rules for like the in front of the dental office, but that side that's where patients come in and out from 8 to 5, to have that be just open parking, that people can just park there, and then nobody's going to spend the night there. There's no cars that need to stay, just that while business operating hours are going on, that people could just park, especially since it's the handicap spot. So it feels weird to have someone park across the street to walk over. It's not very far, but it still is it's just a hassle. And I know we have people that, gosh, they can barely make it in the building. So, and then, my other issue is I know I think the county plows me, but the county doesn't ever make it to me before 8 in the morning, ever. So John comes down and plows. Occasionally when there is time that John talks to your husband and is like, please, please, please. Or, like he would call the county and be like, oh, please, can someone come? And if he sweet talks them, sometimes they come. But even this last snowfall, they never came, in that time. So I don't know. I think I just have to talk to the county, but I wonder how that works, being like, paying the taxes for the business and the commercial. I would really love to be plowed before my business opens at 8 in the morning. And so I'm all for having that area get cleared and having it be safer for people to enter and leave. And if it could happen before our office hours open at 8, and if we could somehow park however people need to park, because sometimes we even have more, we have people parked on both sides of the street in order to come in. So then I'd have to have people start if it's on one side, it's going to be going up the street in order to, get all of the people into the office.
Right.
So that's my request.
Okay, great. Well, we have that on the agenda to talk about, so.
Great.
Thanks for your input. Yeah. Anyone else? Hearing none, then we'll close the open forum, move on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda has a typical 3 items, including a couple of additional items. One is the final payment for the 2nd Street stormwater improvement that was completed this past October/November. And then the other is the hiring of Judy of VTech or Vitech for library clerk down at the library. That was emailed to you as well. So unless somebody would like to pull one of those for conversation, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'd make that motion.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Anybody?
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries. All right. So we'll move on to the audit presentation. So let us know who you are, and let's get going.
All right, I'm Devin Segler. I'm from Walker, Drew and Honey. I've been there for about 9 years. I've been working on the city of Grand Marais for 5 or 6 roughly. And I'm here to present the audit.
Oh, sorry.
Wrong signal.
All right, so I'm going to start off with the unqualified opinion. On the top of each slide, I wrote the pages of the audit report and where to find the stuff that I have in here. So the opinion paragraph's on page 3. It's an unqualified opinion, which is the best opinion you can get. The opinion doesn't give the financial health of the city, but it does say that your financial statements are reported in accordance with GAAP. So your financial statements are free of material misstatement and they're reported properly. Government-wide financial statements. This is taking the city as a whole, and this is just the net position. And the main, I'm just going to point out major changes in these reports. So I included December 31st, 2017 and December 31st, 2018. As you can see, I mean, total, there's a slight increase from 2.5 or from 2.53 to 25.7. Governmental funds decreased roughly 2 million, and enterprise funds increased roughly 2 million. This is in large part due to the new building that was added. The way the capital projects fund, or the way the building was accounted for was in the capital projects fund, and once it was completed, it was spread to the enterprise funds. So that's why you can see this net investment in capital assets decreased in the governmental funds, and then the enterprise fund increased because that asset was spread amongst the enterprise funds. This is a statement of activities. I handed it out. I know it can be hard to see. There's no real major changes here. Just like I talked about with spreading that building, the change in net position is the biggest thing that stands out, and that's due to these transfers, which is the transfer of that building from governmental funds to the applicable enterprise funds. Otherwise, I mean, it's just pretty much business as usual, and there weren't really any major significant changes. This is the balance sheet of the governmental funds. Again, I'm going to look at just the fund balance portions, and I provided 2018 and 2017 numbers so you can kind of get a comparison. At the bottom of the page is this total fund balance line for each. So you can kind of compare 4.6 to 4 million from 2017, and in the debt service fund, it's $1 million at the end of 18 compared to about 800,000 in 2017. So I mean, ideally you'd want to see your fund balance grow, which I mean they are growing slightly here. So I think there's no major things to point out here. Statement of revenues, expenditures. and changes in fund balance of the governmental funds. Again, I'm gonna look at the bottom few lines that change in fund balance. Every one of them's going up. Other governmental funds, so the negative 101,000 primarily comes from the library and the Public Works Facility Capital Projects funds. Other governmental funds are not reported as a major fund because they're deemed not significant to be reported as a major fund. Not a whole lot else I can say. I mean, it was pretty much similar to 2017 as far as revenues and expenditures. I know Kim had brought up your fund or your new highway project and how you're gonna fund that and what the state auditor suggests you should have as unassigned fund balance. So I pulled this from the state auditor. This is a statement of position from the state auditor, and it says local governments that rely significantly on property taxes maintain an unrestricted fund balance of approximately 35 to 50% of their fund operating revenues. So, at the end of 2018, I provided the fund balances in the general fund. Unassigned is roughly 2.7 million, and total revenue in the general fund was about 2.4, and total expenditures were about 2 million. So as of the end of the year, according to the state auditor's guidelines, this unassigned fund balance compared to your total revenues and total expenditures for the year, I mean, it's well over 100%. So I mean, compared to their guidelines, you're well within their recommendations for your fund balance. Also, your unassigned fund balance of 1.8, you set a lot of money aside for specific projects, which I'll get to in a second on this slide. So these are your fund balances for all of your governmental funds. And this assigned fund balance, you've already set a lot of money aside for different projects, which that money should be taken into consideration when you're calculating that unassigned fund balance and comparing it to what the state auditor suggests your unassigned fund balance should be. Next are the enterprise funds. This is found on page 21 of the audit report. And so this is, I think this report is the statement of changes in net position, and this would be the top portion, which is strictly just operating. So it's your operating revenues and operating expenses. Typically, you want your enterprise funds to be self-sufficient and operate similar to as a business would. So at the bottom, you can see your operating income or loss. So liquor store is fine, electric's fine, water's fine, sewer, depending on what went on in that fund for operating expenses, you may want to adjust rates unless you had major like repairs to sewer lines or whatever. Like our contract services was 496, so I think
There
there
was
were-
that dewatering and the sewer line up by Benny's. That was well over 200 grand.
So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, so your bottom line wouldn't look quite as bad if you didn't have those major repairs. But this is what we like to look at to see if you may need to increase rates or may not, depending on what you're budgeting for the next few years. Then the next slide is the non-operating portion of the enterprise funds. So you can see at the top, there's operating income and loss. And the major changes here would be the capital contributions, like I talked about before. That those capital contributions of 1.5 and 489,000 are was the building being moved over to the enterprise funds. And other things would be transfers out, which are somewhat major, and I'll go over those in a second. On this next slide, I believe. No, this is net position of the enterprise funds. And but you'd probably like to see them grow, which I think each fund did grow slightly, and in large part due to the major project of that building. And here's the transfer out slide. This comes from page 39. It's one of our notes that shows all the transfers in and out of funds. The transfers were used to move profits or excess cash from the liquor store to the general fund, move the city's contribution to the city library, move funds to the debt service fund for debt service expenditures, fund the construction of the public works facility, close the public works facility capital projects fund, and reimburse enterprise funds for their portion of revenue received by the general fund. So a lot of these, I mean, you probably already know about because you approved it, or their debt service expenditures, which you have a clear understanding of also. One of the things that is kind of new this year or would have changed from last year is this prior period adjustment. Since the city combined the city side and the PUC side for PERA, they were two separate entities according to PERA. But since they were combined, then they are combined. So this restatement is reallocating how we showed that liability in these enterprise funds. And that was just basically due to combining the two. And I mean, you can see it's not real significant dollar amounts either in the grand scheme of things. But I wanted to point it out because it's something that wouldn't have been there last year. So now we get to findings. Segregation of duties and lack of control over financial reporting. These two findings are in, I would say, 95% of our audits. Pretty typical for small governments because you don't have a massive budget to hire enough people to segregate duties properly. A lot of times, because we put this in there from year to year, it can seem repetitive and get put to the side burner, like it's not a big deal. But as a council, continual oversight over staff and employees you play a major part in segregating those duties as much as possible by reviewing bank statements or approving invoices and that kind of stuff. Then the lack of control over financial reporting process basically states that we prepare the audit report, and 95% of our clients, we prepare the audit report and issue it.
And so you find that that's something that you write down as it's a negative, or is it just a finding? How would you interpret that finding for a lack of control over the financial reporting process? Because, like you just said, we hire you to do that.
Right. So because we compile the financial statements, in like some other places will actually hand you a report, like a complete financial statements, and then we would audit the financial statements. Where here we take your trial balance and we compile your financial statements.
Oh, okay.
and create the notes and all that kind of stuff. So that's the reason, just for the finding, because there's a control. What we could do is some of the other places that we've gone through, if you have somebody that can like review the process that we go through to generate the financials and has like knowledge of all the notes and everything and could check off on it, that's one way that we could get rid of that finding if you see it necessary anyway.
It's more or less because we're not presented with financial statements each month of the cash flow, the balance sheet, those things. Are you saying that they're not doing that?
This is just the year-end audit report. So like the financial statements that we get, like we take your trial balance and we take all those numbers and compile them into financial reports.
And then you audit the statements that you guys put together.
Right.
That's what the issue is. Whereas
Right.
if we put everything together and then said, here, audit this,
Correct.
that's where there's the double control.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I
So-
just thought that was an interesting clarification to make.
Yeah, definitely. Next are management points. Management points go in the letter, so these are points that or they're suggestions, and they're not, significant enough to become a finding, but they're suggestions that we see when we go through the audit that we think that you guys should know. The first is the liquor store profit margin has varied significantly from 2015 to 2018. And as you can see, we have the percentages there. Then from 2011 to 2014, the profit margin was basically 33.2% across the 4 years. So when we see those variations, it kind of is a red flag. I mean, why the difference? I think in 2016, we had a significant adjustment to inventory. So I think, well, A, B, and C at the bottom are some of our suggestions on ways to improve this. Record all inventory purchases in the inventory general ledger account at month end from the liquor store tapes. Record the inventory relieved and cost of goods sold, and compare the resulting ending inventory in the general ledger account to a physical inventory. One other thing, I don't think it was in here, but markups for certain, for liquor or beer or wine. I don't know, did the council have a set in stone markup for certain types of liquor at all? That might be something to look into also, because I know that I think when the managers changed, the liquor store managers changed, maybe the profit markups changed a little bit. I think it was industry standards was the reason for it, but that would be something that you might be able to control, this profit margin, or understand.
Remove the fluctuation at least.
Correct, yeah.
What did we put, last year we had this issue and I thought we put some things in place too.
We did, and I don't think the inventory is the issue. I think it's definitely the markups. And we found a lot of variability in the markups by product rather than previous managers who just did, this is the markup on everything, period. But we were having different markups on different products. And I don't think focusing on the profit margin percentage is nearly as important as thinking about the actual profit and the types of goods that we're selling and the customer satisfaction. I mean, there's a lot of other things that go into managing a liquor store than just what's the markup. But you can see the change between 2017 and 2018, and that's all about getting some markups back where they need to be.
So do we have anything in place with the point of sale system to keep track of our inventory? What is it?
Whenever we receive an order, it's entered into the point of sale system. There's a record of that entry. So there is an invoice that you can compare with the actual record of entry into the point of sale system. And then when we make a sale, that item comes out of our inventory, and periodically we do a physical count.
Do we do a monthly adjustment to the inventory at all in the general ledger?
No.
Okay.
You're saying that the variation more so comes from the fact that if there's different margins or on wine versus beer, and you sell more beer or wine year over year, like that's going to vary greatly than on what your percentage is.
I'm saying that's how it used to be set. There were not nearly as many types of products in the store, and wine had this markup, beer had this markup, liquor had this markup, and that's not how it's done anymore.
By
Now,
product.
each product, there might be a special price, and we might try to hit a particular point with it, and there's just a lot more variability to it than a strict policy of this is what it has to be. So that's where this variability comes from. I guess I'm not too concerned about a few percentage points up and down in what the profit margin is, as long as the actual profit number is still holding where we need it to be.
Well, it seems that we'll be having this conversation as we go forward with the development of a new liquor store and how that is really going to shape up. I mean, we're talking about different types of product, than we have today, and
In different quantities. And
so this kind of whole discussion is going to be kind of a moving target for a while until we kind of get settled into a new facility, especially if we're in a transition between construction and.
I think it's going to be a moving target every year if, depending upon if it's by product and not just beer, wine, or liquor. If you're selling more Windsor and you're going to mark it up or mark it down to try to do, or Jameson or Bud Light or whatever, it's going to be by product. I think this is going to continue to happen. The inventory is what I would be more focused on. And as long as we have things in place that controls that so that we know inventory is not moving out the door in whatever way, whether through theft by visitors, employees, whatever, that's a concern to me, but we've got things in place for that, so.
Yeah, and we don't see that information. I mean, Mike and Kim are have
Right.
some awareness of that, but we've never seen.
No, and I think it's good for us to be aware and to know and talk about those things, because ultimately we rely on them as we should, but I think in order to cover us as a council and to cover our employees, in all fairness to them, that's something that we need to make sure is in place, because I think that's a fair thing to do for the taxpayers and for our employees, is not to be able to point fingers and say, look what they're doing wrong, but to say, we're putting all these things in place so that we make sure that everything is covered and everything is on the up and up for everyone.
Yeah.
So,
And with trends in the liquor industry, it changes the margins because of the products that are happening, So that's a interesting thing to keep in mind too. But good suggestions. We've got those. Moving on.
All right, and then our second management point is during our review of bid and quote files, we noted that copies of original bid documents for the sewer force main repair project were not maintained at City Hall. A lot of times when local municipalities hire engineering firms, they'll do a lot of the bidding for you, so that gets overlooked. But it's ultimately the city's responsibility to have documentation that they are abiding by the state statutes. So that's one thing that we noticed, that when you have a project, make sure that you keep on file all the bids, all the advertisements for bids, the payment and performance bonds, and what else I have? Oh, council minutes. If a low bid is awarded, minutes must state the reasons.
Oh, if a low bid is not awarded.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry if I misspoke there. And then a copy of all signed contracts and agreements. I've noticed with other cities that we end up contacting the engineer for the bid and quote stuff, but ultimately, if they're not doing their job, the city wants to make sure that you know that, and you're watching over what your engineer is doing for you.
So did you receive from the engineering firm then the information that you needed that would relate to this?
I believe so, because
That would be LHB, probably?
Because if we didn't, we probably would have said that it wasn't on file at all, but I will look into that
Okay.
and make sure.
And that should be a reasonably easy thing for us to get a copy of those things to maintain here. And I get it. I think it's funny about the mower down there. Documentation for the quote on the mower was not on file. That's the mower we got from the other golf course, right? Or is that something else?
No. That's something else.
No,
Not
I
sure.
think it was something else.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I'll let him talk about it.
So this is more of a compliance thing, so Minnesota state statutes require these bid and quotes. So, I mean, if this management point got bad enough, or if, say you got 2 bids and you went with the higher bidder, but you didn't have any reasoning behind it, and the contractor came back that placed the lower bid, I mean, you could be held responsible for it. So you just want to maintain a control over your engineer to make sure that you're in compliance with state statutes. That's about all that management point is for.
Okay.
And then the third one is city policies and procedures require 2 authorized signatures for approval of an invoice for payment. We noted 2 invoices with only 1 authorized approval signature. In addition, for another payment, the original invoice cannot be located. City policies and procedures should be reviewed with staff to ensure compliance. It's only 2 authorized signatures, but it's probably out of 20 or 25 or 30 that we tested. So it's not like 2 out of every bill that you made, but because we do a sample of about 25 invoices to 30 depending, and we review for controls such as authorized signatures. But this is just another something to be aware of, I guess, is why this one's in here. Because, I mean, if it gets to be 5 out of 25, then we start seeing, well, then chances are there's a problem there.
Systemic problem, yeah.
So do we have a plan of correction then for these last 2 things that he's brought up?
I'm not sure how they found 2. I'd be surprised if there's 10 out of the thousands that we've done. And
I'm sure the one invoice was misfiled, but I couldn't find it.
right. I mean, our process is that all invoices that are generated at the department level are signed by the department head. And then they're brought to City Hall and they're reviewed by Marais, and one of us signs them, and then they're put into this packet, and then you see a list of them as well. So those are all the points of opportunity for review that exist. I'm not sure how we could add more than that.
Well, you said you've done this for the city for several years now. This is the
Sure.
6th year that you've been working with. Has this been something that's popped up in the past as well?
I think,
or do
you know, most municipalities that I audit, this can come up, especially with like maybe phone bills or internet bills that you see every single month and they're just repetitive.
Mhm.
I mean, you know what it's for, and it's just the monotony kind of. It's like, oh, well, we only had 1 signature on this. A lot of times that can be the case on some of these. So I don't see it as a major problem. If it was a major problem, we would probably have it as a finding.
Okay.
And like if there was no approval on some of these, I mean, then that's a major issue. But that's why it's just a management point. I mean, it's something that we take a sample of 25 invoices and we test those 25. And then if we start seeing repetitive problems in there, that's when we maybe move to a finding or really start looking at more invoices to see if there's a major problem. But this is just like a suggestion that we noticed that I would say this management point is in a lot of cities' management letters, because I mean, how many invoices do you process in a year? And there's, I mean, chances one could get misfiled. It's not like it's the end of the world, but you know,
Right. Or
if
you
there's
grab-
5 of them out of 25 that are misfiled, well, then I think there's
Where you grab
problem.
them in the stack, you grab 2 of them at once when you're signing them and
exactly.
whatnot. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's good that these are brought to our attention. Obviously, we don't want to start building a pattern of this kind of thing happening on a regular basis, but, I mean, I think, as Mike and Kim have said over the years, there's systems in place, you know, to make sure that these things are taken care of. You know, do things occasionally happen? Well, yeah, they do, but, you know, points it out, that we just need to have some diligence in terms of, you know, dealing with those invoices, or if we're dealing with files that are supposed to be readily accessible, that somehow we work to make sure that they are readily accessible, so.
It's good to have that reminder.
Right, yeah, and then I mean, like, if next year you get the same one and there's a few more, well, then maybe there is something that you need to work on, but.
All right.
That is all I had. I don't know if anybody had any questions for me.
Anyone? Any questions?
It's always informative.
Yeah, thanks for coming up.
It didn't
Yeah,
strike me
you
as
bet.
being any surprises, so that's good. And the management points are handy for us to continue that diligence, and those findings are, seems like those are a tough nut to crack when it's a small organization.
Right.
So, great. Any other questions for him? All right, well, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for your time.
Thank Yeah. you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I want to thank you guys for approving us for next year's audit also. So we'll see you guys next year.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so the next thing that we have on the
Can
agenda.
I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
For number 2, do we have a plan of correction, or how we would make sure that we're keeping the information that we need to have?
Like the bids and everything like that?
Other than just contacting the city engineer about this particular project.
Well, it seems like with the project that's gonna be firing off here, like, we're gonna have more than just like a force main, right? I mean, with the 60, the Highway 61 project, like, making sure that we have,
We won't be doing any bidding for that one, so those are MinDOT's records.
Oh, I could,
even in the utility work,
What
we
about
don't get
the-
any of that stuff, which
Yeah,
is why
it's
we can't
done.
argue about
well, the
stuff.
liquor store, if we redo liquor store, City Hall, or
Yeah.
anything going forward, I would
So-
like to know if there's any,
Think back to the
Plan.
Public Works facility, and,
I wasn't here.
well, let me tell you about the Public Works
There we go.
facility. Where we had 24 different contracts that went all through McGough and LHB, and all the records were created in Duluth and stored in Duluth, and then periodically we would go down and either they'd deliver them or we'd be down there and we'd pick them up and get all these documents brought back to our office. So that, when we have a complex project like that, it's actually not common for us to have this finding. It's much more common to have this finding when we have an emergency force main repair and we need LHB to get it done fast, and we might not do all the things that he has in his list. There isn't a council meeting where there was a vote taken to authorize bids, and the PUC did it, and we didn't necessarily put an ad in the newspaper because putting it in the local newspaper isn't really the right strategy to get bidders. And, you know, we may have only gotten one bid, so there's not, it's that kind of circumstance where this sort of thing comes up. And
Not on a planned project, more the emergency side of things.
yeah, and the things where they don't have all of the steps that you'd expect from a major capital project, where it's just something that is either a mower, a small piece of equipment, where we're not gonna authorize, we're not doing sealed bids at all, right? It's not a big enough purchase to go through that process. We're gonna shop around and try to get a couple quotes, and sometimes there aren't a couple quotes, so then there isn't any of these records that you would see on that list.
I think in that mower was a used mower that Mike had gone through and looked at, and that was gonna do what we needed.
Sure.
So I don't think that for most of our projects this occurs, but in terms of a corrective action, when we do work with LHB, we'll just make sure that we communicate with that up front. We want to have all these documents sent back to us, and then
That is gonna be a really interesting thing, though, when working with Department of Transportation and the DNR for the two projects that are happening next summer. Because those are really their projects, they're not our projects, but we still have skin in the game on those. I'd be interested in seeing how the reporting, what the best way to do that reporting is, so that we can avoid findings about it, you know, and have.
well, there won't be any
They're not our
findings
bids,
above. They're
though.
not our
Right.
project.
That's
I guess-
not our bids. It's not,
So then
It's
our bid
MnDOT's.
balances out because MnDOT gives us a bill and we've paid it, that kind of a thing?
Right, it'll just be an invoice and a payment, and then our records will consist of our contract with MnDOT, the resolutions you passed that authorize the contract, and then all the invoices and the payment records.
Right.
Those are the things we will have.
Okay. Any other questions on the audit? Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Learn a little bit more every year. All right, so next thing that we have on the agenda is revisitation of calendar parking ordinance. So I've heard from a couple of folks around town that just had questions about, hey, wait, how does this work? And also now we've heard about businesses, and I've heard from downtown folks as well who were curious as to, wait, how does this work downtown? So there's the entire ordinance is up for conversation. So if you've heard anything that we need to address to make sure that this thing works better, functions better, I would love to hear that. But a lot of this now, as far as I'm concerned, has to do with the downtown area, the exemption of the downtown area potentially, and or how do we deal with businesses that don't fall in the downtown area. So that's what I gather as the conversation to be had. And this is also something that we anticipated. We anticipated that this would be something that we're gonna have to feel out as we go. So there we go. So maybe we should start with what we've heard from people, and then we can go through conversations about about possible adaptations to the ordinance that would be called for to make sure that it functions better and that it doesn't impact negatively community. So, ready, set, go?
Well, I guess that I'm probably the one that made the phone call first of counselors last week to, actually Patrick. This came to me, and I actually called Patrick at home, and I thank you for taking your time in an evening to talk with me. I think it's growing pains, number one. We're gonna have growing pains, because I've heard for years that Grand Marais needs to have an ordinance. Why don't we ever do anything like everybody else does? Now that we're doing something that everybody else does, lots of people don't like it. And I think it's growing pains. I think we're going to have more growing pains in the fact that the county highway department has changed employees. They are currently short of employees. Last week, they did not plow the city streets with a grader. They did it with a 1-ton truck. It was not even one of the maintenance workers because they were short of help. They are going to be short of help come tomorrow because I'm sure most people are aware a young lady of our community had surgery today. And the family is out of town with her for that surgery. So I expect that there will be issues throughout the county, which is going to happen. I was a little frustrated in the fact that this came about for the downtown piece because in our ordinance, there is the statement of, and there's 2 E's here, so that needs to be corrected, but the second E is talking about basically the downtown area along the streets and avenues of Broadway. We designated this area only has to have no parking from 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. My comment, and I still stand behind it, is there is no way I would support an ordinance that creates odd, even parking in the downtown business district Monday through Sunday, and impacting the businesses during the week when they're open and on a weekend. I mean, that means on Black Friday, which Grand Marais is not a mecca for shopping, but the Trading Post has their sale, Joins has their sale, many of them do their sales on Friday, people will come. I would never support to say, we're going to take away half your parking in these very busy hours.
Right.
That was never my intention. And I was a little frustrated that somehow that came about, or that this wasn't clear enough, because I thought that would have been understood, but apparently it wasn't. A lot of the comments I'm getting are people that haven't read the ordinance and don't understand it. Someone asked a question that I answered, and once I said, this is how it works, because they're like, what's this 5 p.m. to midnight? And it's like, that gives you the chance to be on either side of the street and make sure your car is moved so that at midnight, when the ordinance kicks on and a big snowstorm hits, you're in the right spot. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I've had, my neighbors are telling me, you know what, I'm elderly, it's dark at 5 o'clock, it's been very icy. Yep, Mother Nature's needing her Prozac. I'm parking on the street at 4 in the wrong spot an hour early. And I'm like, again, you're not gonna get ticketed unless we're in a major snow event. Typically, they're not out plowing at 4 in the evening or 5 in the evening. But I think that a lot of this is growing pains. I'm not in favor of making a ton of changes. As far as when we got addressed at the open forum, I think that's a piece that we need to have a discussion with the county. I know formerly that if the county starts at 4 a.m., which happens most often on Monday through Friday if school is in session, they start at 4 a.m. so that they are ahead of the buses. The downtown business district going up to First Street was typically cleared before 8 o'clock. I will almost sign my life on it. If they started at 6 a.m., then no, some things were a little different, which happens on the weekend because it's not normal business hours. I don't know what they're going to do with the change of personnel and with the fact that we now have this parking ordinance in place, and that may be a discussion that we have to have with the county as to if they have spent time planning for how they're going to do things with this change. I know they also will come back in a heavy snow event and at least do up-downs once all of town has been done. And exactly what their plan for that will be, because I thought even last week as we had chunks of slush pile up and then harden, I got to thinking, but other cities do it, geez, if we have a significant snow event, we've got 12 inches of snow and your car is now plowed in, but you still have to keep going in and out that day and parking on that side of the street, then what happens? And I don't know if that means that our street crew might go behind and try and clean up a little bit behind some of that and open things up, or if we just let it go and then the next day the county cleans it up. I think some of those things we can clarify, but I don't know that I'm willing to kind of rewrite the ordinance until we really figure out what happens, because I think we're going to be in growing pains.
Well, and I don't think that there's a need to rewrite the ordinance. I've heard consistent concerns from people that are echo along what you're saying about the downtown area. So I'm curious if anybody has heard anything else, or if you've heard conversations about the downtown area, or what all.
Well, I think, the downtown area obviously is a concern, because, somehow I wasn't under the impression that there was alternate side parking in the downtown area. I was always under the impression that the downtown was going to be cleared up before businesses start and parking was going to be allowed. You just couldn't park on the downtown streets overnight, between those 2 a.m. and 7 a.m. times.
That's why I thought that was called out. Not as an add top of the odd even, but because that's in the downtown section.
Yeah. I do think it would be worthwhile, though, to have, the county engineer come and kind of talk through with us how it's working. We're going to have a couple snow events maybe before our next meeting. If we could have her come in and at least kind of give us some information in terms of what's working, what's not working, are there problem areas that we're still, having to deal with? We're doing this to really help assist the county in their plowing efforts. We should know if it's helping.
And that may be hard for them. Again, like I said, they're short of help, so it's not even going to be normal right now over this weekend as to what it would be like.
Right.
But I think she could give us an idea of some
Well, they have
level,
to have
some
a
level
plan.
of understanding of how the system seems to be working with the alternate side parking.
Anything else that people have heard?
Yeah, I think when we did this, we'd had so much discussion and talking about it that I think that I had taken from our conversation, that the downtown would be no parking 2 to 7, but otherwise it's parking. I mean, that's why our guys come in when they come in to take care of downtown. And so I think the way that if it means that something has to be rewritten in this, or that there's just an understanding with law enforcement, whoever's gonna be trying to enforce this, and just public outreach, however that works.
Well, it's gonna be both.
Okay.
You know, right now, we can rely on an understanding, but the way this is written, there is no language that says that paragraph B does not apply to those areas described in paragraph E2. So, if
And I
somebody
think we
came
should
in and
put
just
that
read
there.
this,
Yeah.
it would be clear to them, if they didn't take part in any of those conversations, that Canada Parking is also downtown. So if that's not what you want, we'll put some language together for you to look at to clarify that those two are mutually exclusive.
But the way that goes to change an actual ordinance, that's 2 readings, correct?
Yeah, it'll take some time. And
You
and
can
in
do-
the
you can-
meantime,
You can do it in one reading, though, if we decide to waive
you
that
do it in one
second,
meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
second reading, the same
I think-
meeting.
If it's
I think we need to do
unanimous.
that. I also think that publicly, we need to give an apology to the downtown business group, because I think we gave them misinformation. And I think that since misinformation was given, and it threw people up in arms, and getting tickets on, or getting stickers and flyers on their cars, and causing a lot of havoc, I think that would go a long way for us to say, you know, we made a mistake, we apologize for the inconvenience and the unrest it caused, and here's the correct information. I think that we should issue that to them.
I have no problem with that. One of the, well, I mean, okay, so first, is that something that we want to have these guys do? We want them to create language that puts that conversation together, or changes that scope of the downtown area? I do
Can't
have,
we figure that out tonight here, the 5 of us together, as to what we want it to say?
well, I mean, we can tell them what we wanted to say, but I don't think we can make a motion on changed language unless we see it.
No, but we
In writing.
could put it as
We
to
could say,
what we would
we
like.
could say what we want it
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that, I think that what Mike said is pretty much sums it up, is that the restrictions in point B then don't apply to that second point E, or.
Well, I didn't think it
modify
did. I didn't think downtown was gonna be odd even parking.
Right,
No.
I don't think any of us.
And then when I saw flyers getting put on cars and hitting Facebook and public media, then I thought, well, okay, it seems kinda odd, we're putting flyers on cars when we don't have anything posted downtown telling people what the rules are. So if you had tourists parked down there, for
The post-
example,
Yeah, the signs and stuff.
they don't know. I mean, we might know because we have this sitting in front of us, and a few local people might know because it's been published in the paper or whatever, but if a tourist pulls up to odd or even side of the street and there's no sign telling them, they don't know. So I
Where
think
is
we're a
this?
little bit premature on putting flyers on cars.
Where is the signage aspect of it? Because that was addressed when Kristen was here.
Yeah, she's getting signs for entrance into town, and I don't think they're up yet.
Okay.
Okay. Is that something that we want to entertain, putting a, no parking 2 to 7 thing downtown? And I do have another point for that 2 to 7 thing, but I want to make sure that we have an understanding here.
I think there should be signs downtown. I mean, I know that lodging's been made aware, but I think that we should be putting that, especially near, businesses. I can think of the tavern, Marais, different things that are open, so that people are aware there. The Marais has a parking lot right adjacent to them that people could use, or things could be moved into there. A little different with the tavern, but yeah, I think signs should definitely be downtown, so all people are made aware, and those in lodging staying down here as well.
And that goes to the point that I heard which was a concern about that 2 AM to 7 AM prohibition of parking, was that, if somebody goes and has a great time at the bar and then, their car is downtown, their option is, to get a ride home and then have their car towed, that kind of a thing. And I don't know where that sits on the spectrum of the ordinance itself, or if there's some way that, that there's an intervention that could cover that situation, but
Well,
that's something I think that we
Other cities
should.
must deal with it. I think
that we should
either,
concern-
if somebody's giving you a
consider.
ride home, they could either possibly move your car for you, or I would go to say, not that you want it, but I'd rather pay a $125 ticket on my car than to pay a DWI.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah.
Don't you have a,
I mean, it's something that it's a concern that I heard. I feel like it's important for us to keep that into consideration.
Right.
As we
Again,
talk about the
growing
situation
pains.
that this will create. Yeah. So it sounds like we want to see this language. I mean, we've got one more meeting here in December. Or no, we got 2 more meetings in December. This is our last one for November. I'm already ahead of the game here. So then at our next meeting, we could potentially take a look at that language and make that change.
can't we do it right now and vote on it, and that's our first reading?
Has to be publicized. to make
Has
an
to be
amendment.
voted on.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it right now, but you don't need to. Like, give us a moment to just think it through and make sure that it
That's
works
fine.
and bring it back to a meeting. And in the
Mhm.
meantime, we're not gonna be enforcing it, and we can get
Well,
the word out
Yeah,
that the
then
change is
that's,
on the way.
I don't care
Yeah.
about timing as long as the word's out that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Don't
and
don't
then-
we have to advertise an amendment to an ordinance, though?
I don't believe we have to have a public hearing for that, but we'll check in with whatever we have and make sure Chris likes the way it reads, so
Okay.
that it's clear that the one and the other don't apply to each other.
And I do think, I second that comment about signage for the downtown. If the rules are gonna be different for the downtown area, then it seems like that is a valuable thing to have available, once we decide what those rules are. So that is something that we can pursue at that point. So that covers part of it. So that covers like the downtown area and the prohibition of parking, et cetera, and odd and even. So now, let's talk about the other part of it, which is, what do we do about businesses that aren't downtown? That operate?
Well, especially if they have a designated handicap spot.
In one spot.
You're not gonna flop that from odd to even, because
Right.
it's, so I mean, I never thought of that, so I'm kinda glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of those are you have above the highway. There's a few downtown, but of course, that's not gonna apply now, but.
Right.
Is your spot actually designated?
Yeah,
Is it-
she's
it's
got
painted.
Painted blue and.
Yeah.
painted and has a sign. It's got all the stuff it needs.
it all.
I mean,
Yeah.
My observation on my 4 times a day walk on Second Street when I go past a number of operating businesses is, I thought one of them was doing a great job and the other one wasn't until the next day, and then I realized, oh, they're just parking on the side closest to their door because it's icy out.
Mm.
And then I heard from another business owner that's not downtown, that's over in the Fifth Avenue area, of the same concern. Like, we've got business operations going on with potentially a lot of parking on the street, and Highway 61 also going to be covered with this. Should we not have the same rules as the
Right, on Highway
as the
61.
downtown? And it gets back to the competition here between the reason we wrote this rule and then the effect it's having on the business operations. So this is really designed to allow our maintenance staff to do the maintenance downtown the way that they do it. And they don't do the maintenance in those other areas. So this type of a prohibition would imply that we have to change the way that we're plowing snow in those other areas if we were not to do calendar parking there. We'd have to have somebody show up and do it early in the morning, which, if we want to treat them like a business district, then that seems appropriate, but it's going to take some resources.
Highway 61 was never part of the conversation,
That it would be subject, it was always part of the conversation that it would be subject to calendar parking, correct?
I don't think
It just clearly is included in this
yeah,
language.
see, I always had the impression that Highway 61, based on the different type of plowing that goes on there, was exempt from even this consideration, because I thought the conversation was to assist the county with their plowing efforts and not, and we had never had a conversation with MnDOT about how this might work for them.
Well, we've had a lot of conversations with them about clearing snow and parking lanes, and I don't think we know yet how that's gonna happen in a couple of
Right,
years.
and that's something we need to keep our ear to the ground on for
Yeah.
that particularly. As far as whether or not it assists the county to, in plowing, if that's open or if, if there's odd even parking on Highway 61. I mean, that is another thing that, do we want to exempt the Highway 61 corridor from this as well? Because if we start getting to that point, then, we really do have to take a look at how the plowing and how the cleanup is done to make sure that we're getting at it right.
Well, I guess I had no intention of Highway 61 because I didn't really feel like it was our jurisdiction. That's state plowed, so I don't feel like that's really a spot we would necessarily address as much, and I could be wrong, that's just my feeling. I think some of this may have to, I can empathize with the businesses that are not in the downtown business district. Part of this has been created with our zoning, that when we have the mixed-use zoning areas where people can have a house or a business, and we're looking at redoing some things in how we do it, that eventually maybe we can choose a zoning area, but I don't know how, then do we say that where the laundromat is, that becomes exempt because of where it's at?
Because of business.
It's a business,
Yeah.
There's a business like Alyssa has hers, there's businesses up above on First Street, there's some that are over, in different areas of town. How do we start spot choosing?
That just seems like it makes it way more confusing for people to do the right thing.
Yeah, and again, I empathize, I understand, especially when we get the rain and the ice. I get it, I do. And higher ed is above me, they have an actual handicap parking spot as well. But I don't know how we start putting in except for
Right.
rules to this.
Yeah.
Well, here's one way
Um,
that we're doing that right now, is we've had some conversations between the enforcement folks at the sheriff's office and the highway department and us about, hey, how's this working out so far? And all these issues that you've talked about, we've talked about those, and they're compiling a list of exceptions, things where they're not likely to write a ticket under certain circumstances, or
Well,
we didn't think of that issue and it's come up, and so there'll be a policy, I guess you could say, or a practice of how this will be enforced that they're going to be developing that we can share with you as well.
I
Just
especially.
as, like the downtown overnight bar parking, for instance, the law enforcement doesn't want to create an incentive for somebody to make the wrong choice
Right.
either. And, although there were a lot of opportunities to not get to that point, and the rare occasion that it snows, that we have to plow, if it does, they don't want to have to be put in that position. And so I think that there are a lot of circumstances where if it happens one time, they're not going to be coming and telling people we're not in a hurry to do that. Rather, this is a tool for us to use to kind of clean up regular problems that are getting in the way of our maintenance. So as we learn how this is going to work, I think we may need to come back and make more changes, or we may be able to just address it with that policy document of how they intend to enforce it.
Well, in my understanding, I wasn't there, but I went back and read the minutes and actually had a conversation with someone else, is that even when Kristen Foster was here on the September 11th meeting, it was stated by her, and I think we have all talked and been favorable, that if it's not a major snow event, Alyssa, that your people should be able to park on either side of the street and somebody handicapped. Obviously, if we get what they're saying this week, then it becomes an issue. But if it's sunny and 25 degrees and nothing's happening,
So like today, we had 3 warning things. that were given out. So I mean, I understand.
Are they
Well,
actual warnings
no, they're those,
or
like,
the
little- like, they're
information?
just like you are parked on the wrong side,
Yeah.
you would be in violation.
Yeah.
So I think that only makes, that, I mean, I hear, like, that's fine with me. If that's what the answer is, like, if it's not snowing, if there's not snow on the ground, I mean, we can be logical. You know, if I know that that's fine, I've even had patients say, I'm gonna just park there, they'll just have to give me a ticket. And I think, well, that is terrible. You're in my business,
Right.
having healthcare done, and you're gonna get a ticket? I mean, so that's,
Well-
I just want the
Okay.
clarification of what's the idea of the law?
Well, here's
You know,
my-
like what are we trying to get at? And then we can follow that and we can advise people. You know, like today it's snowing, they haven't plowed yet, please park on the other side. You know, maybe except for
So-
the 95, I don't know.
Our ordinance doesn't state that we are following it daily. It actually says, section 70-29, snow emergency regulations. Isn't that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
But
but we,
we're not declaring snow emergencies.
no, but we put a date when it starts and a date when it ends.
That's right.
If we don't put dates in there, then you can say upon snow emergency, then adhere to this. But right now, like, to me, if it's 35 above and the streets are bare and I get a warning because I'm on the wrong side of the street, I think that's just stupid. That's my opinion. I mean, I know you have this date, we have this date set, and I get that, but, if it's not snowing, who is gonna care? Why are we wasting our time putting pamphlets out in people's windows when there's blue sky and no snow? That's
Well-
because we have a date.
I think
Because we have a date, but.
Well, and part of it's information, because
Well,
people
then
have said,
That's
I've read it on
fine, it's
Facebook, I
information,
never
but
knew anything.
there was too much information about a few days ago. That's the point I'm making, okay? And I think we never really did talk about if we were to do this and declare it a snow emergency.
We did, I thought we did.
Well, we did talk about it. I think there was a lot of discussion about how do you get the word out.
I think that
and
was
how
our
do you-
challenge,
Yes.
right?
That's the challenge part of it, but
Right.
I mean, if it was as simple as like people paid attention.
I think the
to fact.
simplicity of it is if it's not snowing and the streets are bare and the county's not plowing, why should we care where the cars are parked?
Well, and I think that
You know what I'm saying?
that's
Are we gonna
part
go
of
put
the-
tickets on cars?
Well, I think that's part of the conversation that we're having with the sheriff at present.
Yeah, I
And all
think,
the enforcement folks is that the purpose of this ordinance is not to make sure that people are on the right side of the road, but to make sure that the streets get plowed properly. And
That's
so
the
then-
point, yeah,
and
that's-
Well-
those impacts, are really enforceable when that point of view is coming through.
And that's what we
Right.
need, is the enforceability, because I know in past history, when it's been called in that there's vehicles, especially when they don't move for 2-3 different snow events, and it gets called in to the sheriff's department and asked to go please talk, there's no ordinance in place. We can't do anything. Okay, here we have one. So
Right.
now they can go do something.
Well, and I think you're right, Kelly. This is a lot about growing pains and trying to figure out how to make this work in this community, and educating people to follow the regulations. And, we've said from the very start, we wanted this to be reasonable and that we weren't going out to target people that weren't causing a problem. If it wasn't snowing, if there wasn't an
Yep.
event that they were, creating a problem, then there was no need to do an enforcement action. But I think these tags have been put on cars are, it's a good way to get people's attention, probably not the thing people want to see, but, but it does get people to be aware there is now an ordinance in place and there's certain expectations, and how do you get that message across? I mean, you can't expect people to necessarily read the paper or to hear about it, in whatever means. And the idea of this is that, okay, now we have an ordinance in effect. Now we've said, it's taken effect on the 15th. We start our educational campaign of letting people know that, well, if this was a snow emergency and we needed to plow, this would be a problem.
I
And
still get a text message from Minneapolis, a text message, a phone call, and an email every time there's a snow emergency.
They have
I
a
get
whole, they have a whole different system of
I
doing
get all three of
snow
those.
emergencies, though.
But it's just as easy as making a phone call and saying to them, how do you guys do this?
We
That's
call,
how
we
you
call
do it.
everybody that's gonna park on the street. We don't know who's
Well,
gonna park on the street. That's,
so that's-
that's,
but I
that's the
think-
challenge.
That
The
gives opportunity
systems-
For people to register for that
I don't
stuff.
want to engage
Then
with
you
him.
can enforce it and say, we gave you all these tools, and you chose not to use them. So that's why your car got towed.
Well, but I think the towing side of it is really the least desirable of the outcomes that we want, and it's to take care of these situations like Kelly has said, if somebody's sitting there for 3 snowstorms and they haven't moved their vehicle, that's a problem, because that creates a problem on the street, and it creates a problem for the plow drivers.
RV trailers left for the winter on
So-
streets.
Yeah, it's,
I mean, it's a growing pain issue, and we need to figure out how to make this work, because we're trying to work with the county engineer, we're trying to work with the city staff, we're trying to work with residents and business owners to see how
And visitors.
we can make this happen in a way that's productive.
and honestly, I think that the way that the ordinance is written and the way that we, that we're working on enforcing it, I think is the loosest, simplest way that we can do it. You know, as far as, you know, having, you know, snow emergencies be the, you know, be another option, you know, I would be really interested in how those systems work that they use down in the Twin Cities. You know, whether or not they just isolate like everybody, or if you have to enroll in those things to do that. Because I was at a meeting today. There's 2 points from this meeting today. It was the emergency management meeting up at the hospital, and I parked on the hospital side of the road, and I got one of those things stuck in my window because that's the wrong side of the road for today. And now, I mean, I'm glad they did that, because now I know. I live on the avenues. I don't live on the streets. I don't know which side is out, or even, you know, for the streets, because I don't live there. But now I know that I know which side of the street to park on, because I know which side is not the right one for today. So that's one handy thing about it. And the second thing is that the conversation about Code Red came up in the emergency meeting, and people were talking about, well, can we get information out to people via Code Red? How can we do all this stuff? We were talking about the power outages. And the emergency services coordinator for the county said that 16% of the county is enrolled in Code Red. And they've had Code Red for 4 or 5 years. You know, so we're starting to talk about.
That's not bad. I'm impressed.
Well, I mean, but we're talking about trying to get an effective communication strategy for a snow emergency. You know, having the understanding be that, you know, warnings are not tickets, and that we need to educate people so that when there isn't a snow event, then we are able to actually plow the streets because people know where to go. That seems like a looser, not a strict way to move about an ordinance like this.
Would it
So-
be impossible to adjust the language on these notices
Are we supposed to
so
be
that
doing
it
this?
said, if we needed to plow the streets, you would be ticketed and your car would be towed because you're on the wrong side?
We-
The if.
We never
We-
stated we wanted to tow vehicles.
I
And
don't,
we,
I don't
Yeah.
know,
Because
don't hold me
So-
on that language. I haven't seen one. I don't live in town, but would it be so difficult to say if, then, instead of
Yeah, my
just.
cousin got one on her car. when she went to
Because
work at
that's
the
what.
I don't even know,
Well,
is it the sheriff's department put
We
it
put-
together, or did we?
downtown.
Yeah.
The sheriff's department did
That's
put
what I
one of
thought.
them together because.
And I appreciate their initiative, but we'd be happy to talk to them about the language.
Yeah, and
You know, because just from our perspective, I didn't know if it was a Grand Marais rumor, that you could, if there wasn't snow, you're okay to park, right? And I thought, okay, that seems super logical, great. But then when we got the notices, then there was the discussion, well, do you think that means that's a rumor, or is that true? So I think if it had the language, if we needed to plow, you would be ticketed, it would give.
Well, again,
But,
that
I mean,
didn't
I
come
don't
out,
know.
that didn't come out of us.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
So-
but I'm not here,
Yeah.
I like this ordinance, I think it's gonna be lovely when it gets all figured out. I'm not against it, and I love your discussion and where you guys are going, and I feel pretty secure about this understanding and what you're trying to do, and that there will be, logic implied, you know, I mean, it all makes sense to me. I've sat here, right, I came, and now, gosh, doesn't it make sense? But it's so hard in the way that rumors go around Grand Marais. Is it really true? Can you park where you want to park if there's no snow on the ground? Does it only matter if it's a snow day? I think that's,
That wasn't a rumor, that was an email I sent to you.
For-
well, no,
For
but
me-
maybe some people are
in
going
my-
out, you know, like-
For me, and I can't
Keep this
speak for the rest of the council,
Yeah.
and then maybe we can move on, because there's definitely things we have to clarify, but I really truly think all of this is trying to get people to be good neighbors, and I use that word all the time now, because otherwise people say, oh, I'm not their friend, or I don't know them, or this. You want to be a good neighbor when you're living within the city, right? I'm hoping when you're out in the country, if you're by somebody, you want to be a good neighbor to them. And that's what part of this is, because there are people who have a hard time getting to their homes because of the way people park. There are streets that are very narrow that I know firsthand, my husband would drop his blade and back up and leave because he couldn't get through cars. And call the city guys and say, you're going to have to do something with what I left there. There's a berm because it can't get through. And that doesn't benefit any of us. And we also have to remember that there's emergency personnel that go around, right? I mean, if you've got somebody who's in need of an ambulance, that's a priority. It's not about whether your driveway gets socked in or not. It's about whether people can get to where they need to be, especially in emergency times. So I think the majority of this, for me, is trying to be a good neighbor, working with the county, working with the sheriff's department. But obviously, we probably, and Mike will, have a conversation with Pat about language. And again, I think we need to issue through Facebook page, whatever way, that we made a mistake and this has been clarified and we need to update our language, however we do this in whatever readings.
And talking about the penalty as well, I mean, that's one of the things that the ordinance, the purpose of the ordinance is to get to that final, to that, you know, to that level of safety and efficiency in our snow clearing and in travel around the city. And the penalty is one of those things that is an end, you know, it's a means to an end, right? Like it's not something that we're gonna throw around, or that this is even designed to like throw around. You know, there's a reason why we chose the word may be towed under the guidelines.
Yeah,
Instead of.
we talked about that.
Instead of will be towed, you know, because that was part of the conversation, is that we don't want this to be something that is, you know, that is kind of lorded over the community from November 15th to April 15th. We just want to make sure that we can get the snow plowed and get people into their, you know, to the space in front of their homes. So that, you know, those conversations about getting the warnings and all of that such stuff, I would take that, or I took the one that I got, at least, as an educational point, to say, like, this is the side of the street that you should be on and not be on, per, what's today? So for that specifically, I'd be willing to let that ride and see how that plays out. You know, we're gonna be getting a bunch of snow this weekend, so I think we'll probably be able to see this one starting up this weekend and see how it functions. Let's get a little bit more data on that. I'm really interested in the exemptions and ideas that the sheriff's department and the county are creating as well. I would be interested in taking a look at what an exemption for a handicap space would look like. Whether that then puts the snow clearing responsibility on the person who maintains the handicap spot, I don't know. But I think that's something that we can talk about. As of right now, it looks like the main change that we're talking about, though, is the change for the odd even downtown. Is there further discussion that we want to have on Highway 61, or do we want to leave Highway 61 as this as well, or do we want to talk about exempting Highway 61 from odd even as well? I just want to make sure that we get all this stuff clear as we talk through.
Yeah, I would like to exempt Highway 61 at this point, and maybe it becomes part of the consideration when the city takes over plowing the new 61.
That could change that.
Because I think now you're not dealing with MnDOT, you're dealing with the city crews, or in some respect, the city is going to be taking care of those parking lanes.
When they're designated parking spots, then we'll be taking care of them.
Right.
Right.
So I think that's
So then I think we should leave it, like, the discussion for that at that time. Right now, I think we should just exempt it, like you said.
That's my
Yeah.
thought, to
Okay.
exempt it until we get to that point where we
That's how I feel, yeah.
Okay, so we can pass that instruction along.
Can we also talk to the sheriff's department and make sure that they're not putting warnings on the downtown streets until we kind of get this resolved?
Thought they stopped, but
We'll make sure.
After the first hubbub that I heard about them getting put on downtown cars, then I reported that here, and they already knew about it, and then I believe that got passed along. I haven't heard anything since then about downtown cars getting letters on, or notes on them, but.
We
I
didn't
also-
direct them to stop, so.
Well, that's what I'm just saying, is we
Yeah.
should direct them to stop if we're looking at changing that
Okay.
part of the ordinance.
All right.
Okay,
Okay.
they didn't do the downtown ones the last week, right? Or did they?
You did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Last
think that
week,
was
yeah.
them, So,
And I think
okay,
the only other thing that I'd say, like, as we try and work through that, is isn't part of what we had talked about with, I mean, later on in the season, when they're going back with the grader to like wing back, you know, to get rid of the berms, I mean, that could be a sunny day where it is 35 degrees out.
right.
And, you know, I mean, that, I don't know, it's a. there's
Yeah, and they go
challenges on-
remove snowbanks, they did
I mean, and that,
2
like, that,
years
they
ago
seem to,
along
like, last year they did
First
it, but they
Avenue.
marked off the street, you know,
Yep.
3 days ahead of time, and every I could look down the street and there wasn't a car parked on it, and therefore everything got cleared out just fine, but, and so maybe it really is just there's, you know, some sort of communication that's put on the county then when they're gonna do that kind of work, like if it isn't, you know, a snowy day. I don't know, it's a tough, how do you
Well,
put that,
Yeah, that's kind of.
how do you put that, like, rumor
hard.
of not, if it's not snowing, it's nice out, you can park anywhere you want, when really,
That's not what the ordinance
that's not what the
says.
ordinance says.
Right.
No, it doesn't.
And if you ask just any random county attorney,
Right.
they'd probably suggest that you enforce it the way it's written,
Mhm.
because that's how you enforce rules,
Right.
law.
Well, and I think that's the value of having the county engineer come and talk to us about how this is all working and what she envisions, you know, as the winter goes on, in terms of, you know, plowing back the snowbanks,
Yeah.
how that
I
works.
think we gotta give it a
What-
few tries.
What
Yeah.
options do
Find
we
out.
have available to let people know that that's gonna be happening?
Right.
Well, that's part of the conversation about this way versus snow emergency way.
Yes.
Is this way is easy to understand, and it's about building habits, and then the rare exceptions are where people's behavior is actually in conflict with our activity. But it allows us to do maintenance, what you're talking about. You know, what does it mean to be done? A lot of places like Minneapolis, for instance, their ordinance says when the street is plowed from curb to curb. And we don't necessarily do that here. As the winter gets longer, we may not see our curbs until May again. So how do you codify a rule that allows for all these exceptions where we're only gonna tell you if you're in our way, when we can't really predict when you're gonna be in our way?
Right.
Other than say, stay on the odd side or the even side, and we'll stay on the other one.
And that's, and I, as a piece of, you know, exemplary information, this past weekend was a really busy one in Grand Marais for there's a festival down at North House, the winter is gathering there. And so we put a sign on our door for the bed and breakfast that said, you know, here's the deal, park on odd evens and act like it's the next day starting at 5. And every single person got it right. Like every single person, we didn't talk nor explain it to any of them, and they all parked on the right sides of the road. And then when we talked about it at breakfast, they're all like, yeah, we've had a calendar parking ordinance for years.
Most places
You know,
do.
so not to say that, that's an encouraging thing to say that we'll get there. And I think that habit building is something that we need to, yeah, it's just gonna take a little time. But now I know which side of the street to park on when I'm on the street.
Didn't we have language, didn't we have language in this though about the penalty?
As far as,
Well, prior to a car getting towed, wasn't there some issues, wasn't there gonna be an attempt to contact the owner?
Yeah.
That's not,
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the only thing we talk about is a reference to this statute, which
Okay.
basically puts it in the hands of law enforcement.
Okay,
And the
Yeah,
law
so this
enforcement
is a
statement
full-on
said
law
that they
enforcement
would
traffic ticket.
okay, well,
reach out.
And they have to, in order for law enforcement to ticket someone according to the, or to tow somebody and according to the statute, they have to ticket them first. You know, so then I think that was part of what they were gonna do, what the.
when we were talking to the
law
county, I
enforcement was gonna
thought she was talking about, well, before we actually tow a car, we're gonna reach out to the person to try to
do. Yeah,
do what we can to eliminate having to tow it.
Yeah.
That
But
both.
if it comes down to that,
It
then,
was like a last resort
right,
thing.
so.
Yeah.
And the,
I think that people need to try to understand that your
Yeah.
car's just not gonna get swept off the street because you messed
No.
them, made a mistake.
Right.
and the deputies are taking some initiative here to get the word out about what the rules are.
Right,
But when we start enforcing this, the deputies won't be the ones looking for issues. It'll be the maintenance folks that'll
Yeah.
be reporting issues to the law enforcement.
okay.
And that's our last resort to do that, rather than to find some easier way to deal with the problem. So,
yeah. I think that's helpful to bring that up. Anything else? We talked about a couple of language changes. We've talked about some implementation concerns. We have some more information that we're going to be gathering in the future. Is there anything else that we need to continue discussing on this one?
No, I just hope that, it's frustrating. We worked on it for 6 months or had information out there and really didn't have a lot of feedback, and of course now it happens. So
It's all
I'm
right.
hoping that if people have other thoughts before we try to move through this, or as things occur now, that people will constructively, call us or email and say, hey, have you thought about this, or what about this? Or here's an issue I'm having, so that we can look at some of these things and talk about them versus
Right.
waiting till everything's kind of in place. But I think it's hard because people don't necessarily, if it's not the front page of the paper, if they buy it, I think people aren't really seeking out that information. So,
Well, and also this is something that is, it's hard to visualize until it's right upon you, right? So, so that's, now we're in that point where this is happening, and that's when people are actually in it. So I would encourage community members to continue to give feedback on it so that we can continue to make it work or continue the educational process that needs to happen, so.
Well, and I think along with that, we certainly want the community to let us know what they think is working or not working. But I think also to make sure, Mike, that you come back to us with reports from our maintenance, people, the sheriff, the county engineer, whoever it may be that's providing you comments on how it's working for them. If there's issues that we need to be aware of, we might just not be aware of how it's actually functioning. We know what the ordinance says, but we don't actually know how it works, so.
Right.
Just to keep getting that
Yeah.
update, because we're all learning about how this,
It's all been hypothetical until tomorrow.
It's gonna be like 2 inches, it's fine. It's not gonna happen.
I know, we're not getting that big done. We're not
I'll
getting
send
that
down
big
a
done.
plow, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Make sure that I plow it myself.
We'll keep working on it, though. I think that makes the most sense. Anything else for this? Then we can move on. All right. So, thank you for that conversation. That was helpful. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we're going to move on to the budget update. So we passed preliminary budget, or a preliminary levy, and that caps what we are able to request. There have been some changes in the 2020 budget due to a slightly higher than we had expected insurance increase, property maintenance department wage adjustment for one person there, and an increase in debt payment contribution, and also the council priority line item. So,
And I forgot to mention, the rec park revenues were also adjusted based on the park board's rate actions.
yeah.
So,
Up.
So then we're looking at,
3%
Yep.
or something.
so we're looking at the 2020 current versus projection. You want to kind of take over and break down the numbers for us in a little bit more detail?
This is where it exists today. This is not our, recommendation for you to pass. The current, it's about 1.5% increase over the 2019 levy. We'll be back at your next meeting with the formal presentation of the final draft of the budget and levy recommendation. I just wanted to give you an update and talk about a few of the things that have changed. We've talked about some of them before, and so we're just looking at the results of them now. The debt levy is a little bit higher than we had originally projected, and I've carried that a little bit higher into the future 2 years as well. So we talked about that last time we looked at the budget, but here it is in action. There isn't any new project debt for 2020. We know that we're not going to be borrowing any money that needs to be paid back in 2020. So that's taken out of the projection. We're also pretty certain it's not going to be in 2021 either. This new project debt is City Hall Liquor Store. So as fast as I could imagine us going, we're borrowing money next year and paying it back starting in 2022. But I've also increased what that number is based on, our recent experience with project costs altogether. And then we've made some other changes. We're not building any additional liquor revenue in this year other than the $200,000 that we take every year. And we're also not doing that in 2021. It makes more than $200,000, so the rest of that money is just being accumulated in a fund balance that we'll look at in the next slide here. And then we're not going to use any council priorities. That was part of the way we were going to absorb this new debt payment, and since we don't have it, we're going to leave the council priorities where they are. And in 2021, we're actually going to increase that number a little bit, and then for 2022, we'll decrease it quite a bit as a way to absorb that debt payment of about $200,000. So that's all projections. None of that's based on an actual project budget yet, but we're just trying to get a budget that makes sense based on the things that we're planning on doing. We can pass it right here, right now. There's a lot of other moving parts that the PUC, you can't actually pass it today, but it's able to be operated the way that it's written right now. The PUC is still talking about some other moving parts to their budgets, and they'll be looking at that next week, including the idea that we might be able to use some water funds to pay a debt payment that we're currently using general fund funds to pay. I was intrigued by that idea, but I'm less intrigued now that we've paid for Highway 61, and I really think the water fund can probably use a little of its own money for the next year or two just to accumulate its fund balance back up to prepare for the projects that we're planning on using that cash for in the future, and we don't really need to make that transfer to make the general fund budget work in 2020. The other thing is the electric fund is potentially able to increase its contribution to the general fund, and we'll be talking about a few ways that the PUC might do that in an effort to shift some resources around so that they have got a few more resources to help with their administrative capacity, and that we would use their money transferred to the general fund to pick up some additional resources to help with some of the things that we're doing right now, and we'll talk a little bit more about that after the PUC's had a chance to go through it. So any questions about this? This slide's just designed to show you that this would work into the future with the projects that we have planned without significant changes.
So what this is telling me is that if we were to set the levy today, we'd do a 1.48% increase, and we had originally passed it to be
2.9.
2.9. Okay. So
yeah, the biggest change that writes it down is the increase in rec park revenues that are built in there. That's offset by a small increase in health insurance, a small increase in our property maintenance wage, and a medium increase back into the council priorities, but there's still a little bit left that we're using to write down the property taxes.
So as I was looking at this, I had a thought, and I'm just going to throw it out there, because a lot of times I know we always, as counselors, try to look and keep it as low as we possibly can, and I'm for that, but I thought, okay, 1.48. What if we did 1.5, you know, because
Give
I
us
like
It'd
things
probably be like
neatly.
$6.
Yeah.
It's actually a $5,000 difference, which spread across the city, but I thought, and I don't know what the final product would look like. Would doing something like that make any sense? And then as a council, we designate that amount to go to a specific area, whether it's into capital, whether it's into, you
I
know,
don't think
set
it's
aside for
5,000.
health insurance reserves. Well, I know 5,000 isn't, but again, I'd rather be able to go to the city taxpayers and say, it's 5,000 that we're taking to invest, so that even if it's 10 years from now and we've done this, or a council has done this for 10 years, there could be a reserve built up that keeps it 10 years, instead of they set a levy at 8%, it keeps them down at 6.
So that just, you're
See where I'm
saying-
going?
You're saying just creating, it'd be like an Operation Roundup thing to just make sure that future situations would be accounted for?
Right, and I'm
That
not
kind of
looking to
thing.
go from 1.48 up to 2, but even if we were at 1.46, okay, what if we go to that 1.5, so that we're kind of planning down the road? And I go forward and I still think back of what Office said about taking care of 7 generations. And this won't take care of 7 generations, obviously, but if we do that, I mean, we all kind of put money into a retirement or into a savings account, or we drop change in a change jar and say this is for a rainy day, right? Why wouldn't we want to try to do that as a council? And I don't know where we'll be in 2 weeks. This could change, and it could be at 1.67. I might then say, could we go to 1.7, and what does that mean?
The 0.02% is about $200. So if you, the spirit of what you're talking about is, if you look at the council priorities line item, for instance, it's in the budget at $115,000. The things that we actually have scheduled to spend that on in 2020 are the housing study that we're working on to make some changes to our zoning there, and some design work for the liquor store, city hall, preliminary to getting it done. There's more that would accumulate into the fund balance that we'll be using to pay cash for a future project. So I think we're already doing what you're talking about.
And I know we are.
And, but then the question is, okay, 1.48, yeah, we can round that to 1.5, no problem. But would you want it to be 2 would really be the way to say we want to put something else, an addition, away for future projects.
And I've had this conversation with Mike a number of times. I remember when I first got elected, I beat my head against the wall with that year's budget, to understand, you know, like, are we putting away enough to do all of that? And I was pretty impressed by, you know, well, the audit speaks to our reserve funds. You know,
Yeah,
our
and
reserve funds are
I don't
very-
disagree with any
are
of
very
that.
healthy, and that, you know, the idea of holding back something while things are good for when things are not so good. I'm very sympathetic to that situation, but I also do feel like the policies that we have in place right now for our budgeting, number one, does does insulate a lot of our funds from those bad situations that could arise, and also is maximizing the amount that we can be responsible to the taxpayer. You know, like, and you know, I know if we go to 0.15 then, or 1.5, then that extra $200, you know, is like, but I've had that conversation, you know, or I think that the council has had that conversation a lot, to say, what is that level of maximum responsibility to the taxpayer? And it's always kind of ended up in the conversation that the policies that we have right now are doing a pretty good job of that. Not to say that we can't change it, but it's...
No, it's something to think about, and I
Yeah.
think back when with the golf course task force and different things, as we met with Paul and Dave even, we have no money to get, very little money to get carts and to upgrade some things that might make it a little bit more attractive and more useful. You know, is that a way to kind of, again, like I said, to try to find some ways to put money that's not gonna break anybody, you know?
Must be.
Yeah, I mean, to me, those are the kind of things that we should be line iteming in a budget. I mean, we do that for the Parks Department, for the Rec Park, for the Streets Department. We have capital reserves that we set aside so that because we recognize that we're going to have needs. I mean, our audit report shows that we have solid capital reserve funds, and that's something that, comes with, consistently making good decisions about, setting aside. I don't think it's a good practice to just take some dollars and just kind of set them aside randomly. I think that.
No, we'd have to designate.
I just think but we've already gone through the whole budget process. We've come up with a number, and now we're just saying, well, maybe we should just round that up a little bit. I just think that's not a practice that I feel very comfortable with. I think we do a good job and put in a lot of time analyzing and constructing our budget, and we try to do the best I think we can to make sure that the city functions and the departments function the way they should, and that the taxpayers, are getting a fair shake on things. And we look at our levy, 3%, 2.72. I mean, we've consistently had levies that have been under 4%, for a long time, and it's because I think that we've done a good job. Our staff gives us a lot of information and ability to set aside for projects that are important, but we also know that we just don't have unlimited resources, and I think that's.
I think the biggest way that we can do, accomplish what you're talking about, Kelly, is probably to continue to support our enterprise funds. Because those enterprise funds by far are the biggest property tax insulator that we have. And be intelligent about the reinvestment of those funds. Yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense.
One more way to think about it is the reason we added these couple of future years in this projection is to kind of give some context to what's that number for next year mean. Because it's really hard for me to say I have to have 1.48% next year. If you told me you can't have a levy increase next year, we figure out how to make it work. But we do that by borrowing from the future. And now that we see what the future looks like, even if it's just a little tiny bit of it, then you can see, well, if we do make that 0, the next year has to be even more. And conversely, though, if we wanted to make it 2 this year, it would have a potential effect on next year's increase. And so there's another reason to think about, 1.48, that'd be great. If it was 2, that would mean in the future we could have a lower increase as well.
I feel like the years, there was several either 0% increases, right, prior to 2014, I think, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Going back over to the 29, this one, not the.
That's the 2019 balance sheet.
Yeah, the draft budget and spending history. Just interesting, clerk and admin in 2013 compared to where we're at now, and then also public safety, public safety.
We expensed a fire truck in 2013.
Okay.
So there's $210,000 in there
There you
that's
go.
not really an expense.
Yeah.
And the clerk administration also includes any miscellaneous projects that don't fit in one of the other departments.
Okay.
So I don't know what it was in 2013, but I'm sure it was, $100,000 pass-through grant or something like that we owned and put into that expense, but then it was a revenue somewhere else.
Sure.
The real ability to understand what the clerk's department and the council's department and all those departments changes over time is to not look at this spreadsheet, but to look at the line item spreadsheet.
Yeah, okay.
So we can dig that out again if you want to see it.
So how are you going to come up with a number for us to?
Well, I'm not anticipating any changes between now and 2 weeks from now. There may be some, and if so, we'll make the adjustments to the budget.
So the
Otherwise,
expectation is the 973.
that's kind of where we're at, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, the biggest potential change to that would be if the Utilities Commission makes some requests or takes some action next week that we want to think about in our budget. But I don't think that has to have an effect on this, so I think this is pretty close to done.
Okay.
Okay.
So the other thing I included was this capital improvement plan, 5-year projection. The list is getting shorter, which is nice, because we've done some of these things. So, for instance, Highway 61 isn't on here anymore because it's been funded. The next project is, there's some meter replacements left to do that we're planning on paying cash for. That is gonna be real tight now that the water and sewer has used up a lot of their cash reserves that were set aside for these projects. But at this level, even if we have to do some internal short-term borrowing, we'll be able to pay cash for it because the electric fund's got plenty of money. City Hall Liquor Store, I upped the price from $2.5 million to $4 million just to see what it looks like in this capital improvement plan. We don't have a budget for this project. We don't know what it's gonna cost. I'd say within a few months, we will have a budget number for this, and so we'll be able to build that in. And that's where that levy debt payment comes from, the idea that, well, we're gonna have to borrow more than $1 million for this project. We're also setting aside a significant amount of cash in this plan to pay towards it as well. The liquor fund has that 1.3 million set aside. I don't know that we'll decide we want to use all of it for this project, but I wouldn't save very much of it if we're rebuilding the liquor store. I'd use as much of it as we feel safe to do and still have cash flow ability. And the general fund, I don't know if we're going to be able to afford $1.5 million of cash towards the City Hall project or not, but it's just in there as an idea of one way to fund that project for now. First Street reconstruction, I upped that from $3 million to $4 million, just because, well, even if we're wrong on what, I mean, even if the prices that we got on 1 or 2 of our sewer line items for Highway 61 are not real, given an opportunity to just bid our own utility project, it's pretty clear that all those prices were high, a pretty significant percentage. So there's that one. And then Fifth Avenue reconstruction, the same thing, we upped it about 25%. So these numbers, after the Highway 61 project, the amount of cash that we're spending in some of these numbers doesn't feel nearly as comfortable as it did. I still think we can do it, but that's where we're at on these right now. This is what our budget is planning to pay for in the future.
Yeah, so that's a really useful tool to look into that. Yeah.
So the Fifth Avenue, that project is all the way out in 2023?
Maybe.
Huh.
That's kind of where the county's talking about it now.
Been a moving
So they
target.
had gone through some steps to see if they could do it in 2021, when Highway 61 was also being reconstructed. And for better or for worse, that didn't happen. So I'm sure some people think it's better and some people think it's worse.
I see Fourth Avenue West is not on here, reconstruction is not on
It's
here.
really not. No. We don't need to do that project at this level, right? It won't cost that much for us to do it unless you want to actually go reconstruct it. Conversations we've had with the county are, let's come up with a short-term maintenance plan while we talk about kind of a mid-term maintenance plan, maybe an overlay or something, that would get it in shape enough that it's just clearly ours and we'll take it from here.
Yeah. But are they gonna push that out to 2023 to give us a decision on that?
I don't think so. I think that we are in talks right now, so I expect to be able to do something next year on it.
Good.
Yeah, that's good. All right, any other questions on the budget update?
Well, thanks for putting all that together. Well, yeah. No, that's-
Come up with some, feel free to forward them to me, and I'll make sure that the information's available for you at your next meeting. Your next meeting, we will have the publicized hearing. All the tax notices that went out said that at 6:30 on whichever day of December that is.
11.
That people can come here and talk about the property tax levy and budget with us. Hopefully we'll get some of our regulars. We can see them again for the holidays. It's always nice. And we'll have that for you. You won't be able to pass the final levy at that meeting, so there'll need to be a second meeting in December, which is tentatively scheduled for the following meeting.
Cool. All right, moving right along. Council and staff reports. Greg, you got anything?
Nope, I've got a meeting next week.
Okay, Anton?
Not since our last one. I don't have anything either. Until Tim or you guys say something, I'll think of something.
Give you an opening.
Yeah, you'll remember something, I'm sure.
Today I went to the county board meeting. They were, had a public hearing on their tobacco ordinance. They did approve the new tobacco ordinance. Not sure what the timing is of them putting that in implementing it. I think it's after publishing and whatever steps that they have to take, so. But I did suggest that with the county adopting that ordinance, that it was important, I think, that the city have this conversation and that we also consider adopting the tobacco ordinance that raises the tobacco requirement, the purchase requirements to 21. You know, all the arguments that were made to the county, I think, are valid to the city, and, you know, I think having half an ordinance or an ordinance that only affects half of our county is, I think would certainly be looked at, I think, if we don't get on the bandwagon. I mean, I support the county ordinance. I think it's a good move. It helps protect our youth in the community. You know, it's one of those things that it's the right thing to do. I think we just need to get it on our agenda and deal with it. So I would like to see the tobacco ordinance developed and brought to the council at its earliest opportunity.
Right, and we can look at what the county works on there to make sure that whatever is brought forward is applicable and appropriate, so, or for, according to what they are working on as well. Piggyback.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, yesterday, Senator Tina Smith was at the hospital for a kind of a conversation with healthcare staff, and I just happened to be there, and Jay was at the meeting also, and a number of great points were raised about the challenges of operating a hospital in a, you know, rural area, you know, and the conversation really moved from the challenges of being in a rural area to the challenges of operating this kind of facility in an area that's beyond rural. You know, comments were made by some of the folks there that, you know, are knowledgeable about the system of, you know, how rural hospitals work, and recognizing that places like St. Cloud are classified as rural in the federal language for, you know, and obviously we're not in the same category as a community like St. Cloud. You know, I think it was a good opportunity for her to hear from the administrators, public health, Grand Portage, the clinic, and staff people about the challenges we have and the importance of having, you know, a hospital facility like that in this community. So, I don't know, Jay was at the meeting. If more you want to add to that, Jay, but it was. I think it's I think they're going to continue to try to work with Senator Smith to have a better understanding of the needs of places like Cook County Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Did they talk about care center funding?
They talk about the federally qualified healthcare funding in general.
They didn't
We're
talk.
not federally qualified healthcare funding, that's the clinic thing, but this would be care center funding and how they fund Medicaid.
Oh,
They
yeah.
didn't.
It didn't come up specifically.
No, they didn't
Kimber
specifically.
Kimber did bring that up, though, talking about how the hospital still operates at a loss because of the way that the Medicaid funding is or Medicare funding is.
The hospital or the care center, which,
Well, I think she was speaking kind of in large part for North Shore Health, which I'm not certain where one stops and the other begins.
Yeah, there's two different books. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I do.
Right. But it was brought up that that's a concern as well. And I'm sure that Kimber had some time giving Tina a tour of the facility, and I'm sure that came up when she was doing that. Kimber's pretty bright when it comes to that sort of thing.
And I saw Kimber today, and they're going to continue to have conversations and provide additional information to try to assist the senator in supporting legislation that will kind of assist with the funding issues and the operational issues and even some of the regulatory issues that are problematic.
Cool. Anything else?
That's it.
All right, Kelly?
No.
Wow, okay. Well, I had a few. So with the Tina Smith thing, housing came up as a very high priority as well. I mean, there are a number of people who work at the hospital that, stated that getting the job was not the hardest thing. Finding some place to live to be here was. Also, they had a lot of support for the higher ed, for Cook County higher ed, and the educational processes that they have in place to help people improve their education, to take those positions, to fill those positions at the hospital and the clinic, because we're not the only small community that's having trouble finding specialists like that. So raising them up from our, from the people who are here, who are interested in doing that type of work, is an absolute no-brainer. So we made that very, very clear as well. Monday, we had a library meeting. It was the first one without Steve Harson as the director. So Amanda St. John, the assistant director, helped direct the meeting. And that was, it's kind of a learning experience for everybody as we go through it. But it went well. And the library board is currently working on creating a list of questions that will be a part of the interview process. And they've identified the members of the board that are going to be a part of that interviewing process for the library director. The position was advertised November 6th. Will be advertised through December 6th, and then as we sort through applications, then we'll start, setting interview dates and such like that. So that was the largest part of the library board's work. We're also going to be revisiting the schedule of events that the board needs to accomplish for each year, just to make sure that we're checking those boxes, because Amanda is pretty new to the director activities. So we want to make sure double check that we're doing all of those things, and we also approved the 2020 calendar for the library. There was a downtown business group meeting that I went to, and they talked about following up from Fisherman's Picnic. It's one of the things that we can do now, and also setting up plans for the winter, events for the winter. There's going to be a winter block party put on by some of the businesses, which I thought was pretty cool. And they're all staying, it seems like most of the downtown businesses are staying pretty positive about next year and the year after, and are really looking to work together to make sure that it can be as positive and as successful for all of them as it can be. The CEC, Creative Economy Collaborative, got together to start work on what a process would look like to find artists and artisans who would be interested in the elm wood from the trees that were taken down. So that's something that is in process as well. And then today I went to the emergency services meeting. They continued to work with pretty much all of the agencies that have to do with public safety in the county, to make sure that our countywide response is as robust as it can be. And I really do appreciate the work that they do in those meetings. And they're already starting to work on the emergency services conference for next year. So if you have any suggestions about what that group should look at as a part of the conference, then send it to me or to Mike, who is the new emergency services director at the county. But that's all I had. So, anything else?
The Personnel Committee met to negotiate
Right.
the wage adjustment for the property maintenance supervisor, and reached a tentative settlement that will hopefully be in front of you at your next meeting after the memorandum's been reviewed and approved by the bargaining unit. And we also talked about trying to schedule actual negotiation of the contract, which is up in the end of December, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the first half of December and get that taken care of as well.
Have you heard anything from them? I haven't had an email, but I guess, okay. Maybe I should search in my junk email too in case.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Anything else? We are adjourned from 28th.
Have a nice Thanksgiving.
Yep. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Jim, does that 21, how does that 21